I'm here with Mr. Harvey Parris. He has a wallpapering company. He's been in the business for quite a while. But Mr. Parris, can you share some of your thoughts about the room? Well, first, tell us how long you've been in the business, what got you into the business.
Well, I've been in wallpaper since 74. That's approximately 38, 40 years
Mm-hmm.
of installing wallpaper. Give a little bit. I started in the paint department and then I started papering.
Because you were with Sears
I was
for.
with Sears.
Mm-hmm.
Uh-huh.
I remember.
Okay, I was working Sears and I started, and then I went to appliances.
Okay.
But in the meantime, I still did wallpaper, and then I had to come up with a solution of taking paper down as well as putting it up.
What got you into wallpapering?
It was just to see the figure, to see the designs, and how the wall make the walls look,
Mm-hmm.
and it was just elegant. Just the way, and process of seeing what a person can do with paper.
Okay.
I started with my manager just showing me paper on a table how to match the patterns, and then from there forward it was just a hands-on
Okay.
and a learning process on the job. So I did some shortcuts and learned, but that's I enjoy doing. I like challenging, and wallpaper is a very, very challenging situation because all walls are not square, so you have to make the design fit the wall, not the wall fit the paper. So that is it's a difference.
You have a passion for paper.
Yes, I do.
Can you tell me what your thoughts are on this room? Because you saw it when we first unveiled it from the the sheetrock that was on there. What was on there, and what our thoughts were in doing wallpapering here. But can you give us a little idea of what would be required to wallpaper this room compared to the little box that we see back there? Some of our discussions we had back then.
Okay, well, first of all, you're not going to be able to put wallpaper over this shiny or slick finish. Even though it's a rough finish, you got to have something for the paper to bite into. So this finish on this wall is like glass. Paper is not going to be able to adhere to that.
So you're saying the wallpaper would have adhered to the wood before we put the finish on it?
Well, there was a process could have been used prior to putting this varnish on. That by sealing those lines in the wood, but now that you have put that glossy finish on, and even at that time you wouldn't been able to have no bite for the paper to get into, even with the old wood.
All right.
So
Tell
there was another process that you may have been able to use by glazing a compound in those grooves and created a rough surface. But now that you have taken and made a slick finish, the only solution that I see that you can do now is put a sheetrock, maybe a 1/4-inch sheetrock. And then you'll need to prime it, and then you can paint or paper. But that's the only solution that I see as you stand right now to deal with this.
Tell them about what we were saying about the glazing. Let's go back to before we put the polyurethane on the walls. What were the walls conditioned then as far as being able to put sheetrock? Put wallpaper on them then.
Well, this sample that we have over there on that wall, you could have used a compound of like mud and sheetrock mud to fill those grooves between those panels, and put a rough surface on top of that wood so that the paper would have had something to bond or to adhere to. That would have been the step that you would have been able to use on the wall prior to other than putting sheetrock on it.
So you're saying that when you say a compound, you're talking about sheetrock mud.
That's correct.
You're saying that we should have skimmed the walls with sheetrock mud to fill in those joints.
Correct.
Basically like a stucco on this wall.
That's correct.
Over the entire surface of the wall, we would have been covering the wood with a sheetrock mud compound to fill in those joints.
Right.
Why couldn't we fill the joints in like they had done with that cloth?
But the cloth, again, you got to have something for it to bite. You got to have something to adhere. That finish you have now is like glass.
Not now. We're talking about back then, before that
Back
finish.
then, okay, back in that day, they used a cloth to fill those gaps in between. And I don't know what kind of compound they used. I guess because my mother used back in the day was like flour dough made up a solution and fill those with that cloth that they did to make to create that wall. But now stepping forward to today and where you are now, this the only solution to you have now is to put sheetrock. Had you been able to do the mudding and the cloth like we spoke of one time, you would have been able to put wallpaper on, or the paper would have been able would just be taking the shape of the wood. It would be sort of bumpy, but you could have glazed over that wall and put the paper on it. But your paper, your wallpaper, and the adhesives have to have something to bite into
Right.
to hold on. And so now you've gone too far to go back that solution. So the only thing that you can do now is to cover that up and start you another surface, another wall, as I say.
Okay. But when we took the scraps of wallpaper down, somehow they figured out how to attach the wallpaper to that wall back then. They used the cloth then, but we don't have that in our current toolkit. The only thing we could have done, from your experience, was to have stuccoed the wall with a compound to fill in all the gaps.
That would give them that wall surface that they did back in that 100 or 200 years.
So one of the comments is that when we look at the space and we see all they did was use that cloth over the joints and they put wallpaper on top of that cloth. And with our technology now, the only thing we could have done is to glaze the wall with some type of compound mud to give us a smooth texture, well, a smooth surface, so that wallpaper can have a not so bumpy, or be able to push in. Someone be able to poke a hole through the wallpaper because there's a joint back there, filling in those joints with a compound to make it solid,
Right.
and to have a texture to that so that the wallpaper can actually grab a hold to that.
That's correct.
But
because that sample that you have on the wall there, that was the process that was used at that time. And over the time and weather, and I think the time they start coming apart. But if you had gone back with a compound, worked similar to that process that they did back then, then you would have been able to hang wallpaper on top of that.
Okay, because we would have had to fill the
You would have to fill those grooves or those joints in between the walls.
Okay. In my mind, I'm like, okay, we would have been changing the character of the wall at that point. Then we would have basically been stuccoing the wood.
Yes, and that's what you're going to do now when you put this quarter-inch sheetrock on, because you're going to create another wall on top of that wall in order for your paint or your paper, whatever process you're going to go, you've got to change this whole base or your platform.
So even when we first took the wallpaper scraps off, we couldn't have hung that wallpaper directly to that wood. We would have had
you would have had to do that process of filling those grooves and glaze over to take that rough finish out, to create another wall above that, so that that paper would have something to bite into. And that's what they did when they by putting that cloth in, and they mudded it or whatever solution they did in between those cracks, and then that cloth was help bond that solution that whatever they used on it to create a smooth wall for that paper to be hung to or to bite into.
Do you think, you had mentioned before where wood has changed over the last 200 years, that maybe those joints were closer, they were not as spread out as they are now?
Yes, because wood have tendency to lose its moisture and it shrinks. So over the number of years, the gap perhaps gotten wider as the wood had aged.
Yeah.
And that was probably one of the reasons why they used that cloth and that's mudding or that solution it is to fill that crack in, because the wood had started separating, drying out. Now those boards was probably put layered on top of each other, very close. But as it aged, then the wood shrinks and the gaps get wider.
So when coming into nowadays, after we have unveiled it, if we were again trying to wallpaper it, we would have had to stucco this wall to get a
To get a wall finish for the paper to hang.
because
Yes.
we're now working with wider gaps than they would have when they originally put the wall in place.
Exactly.
Okay.
And not knowing how old this wood is, you're talking 100, 200. I don't
Yeah,
know.
we think it's around 400 years old
400
now.
years. Well, then it has, with the gap that it has sunk, it's some good wood that, it had made that much movement over a number of years.
Right.
But you still have that space
Okay.
because of as the wood aged, it shrunk.
Gotcha. Now that we have put the polyurethane on the walls, what is the process now? I know you mentioned before, but so that everybody understands clearly, what do we have to do now if we were trying to put wallpaper or paint this room?
You need to put a sheetrock, create a whole new wall on top of this finish here. There's not even sanding, nothing you can do for that paper or even paint right now to adhere to this surface. So my recommendation is to put sheetrock and prime it. Then paint or paper it, whichever of those two you plan to use. But you must create you another wall. There's nothing you can do with that wall right there, in my experience, with that glossy finish. Paper, or not anything that's going, even some of the contact paper that will probably stick on the surface, you're going to have a problem because it's not going to be able to get the air bubbles from between that wood section that you can make it smooth. So you're going to have an air bubble build up even with contact paper with adhesive on the back. So the only solution that I know in my experience of 35 plus years is that you need to create another wall. Now that wall can come down later and not destroy this paper, but in order to change the facing of what it looks like now, that is a process that I recommend that you do.
What is more true to the house?
When you say true,
Yeah. What would be more true to the house if I create a new wall to put wallpaper on now in this dining room,
but
or what we have now?
if you create and put you another wall, you can go to the 1900 or 1800 series and buy wallpaper that will give you that during that time and create and give you what you're looking for that age, that time. But once you build that wall, you can do anything you want. But if you find you some wallpaper, and I'm pretty sure that you can, in the 18 or the 1900s, and similar to the blue room on the other side, you can create that year that we have. But once you have created your wall, you can do wallpapering and give whatever year, century that you want by putting wallpaper up. Painting, well, that's a different story. But wallpaper, you can go back and find that 100 or 50 or 75-year-old paper to design. So if you put the sheetrock on, then you can create your finish by wallpapering to whatever year that you want it to be to find your design. But once you build a foundation, then you can do wallpapering or painting. And you can create that year or years by doing your wall by sheetrocking. Then you can wallpaper it and get that 1900 or 1800 if you can find that pattern that you want. It can be put on that. You can create that wall.
And which pattern would that be?
The pattern, well, it would be similar to what you have in that blue room there. or you may have some patterns that with other designs of flowers or flooring or I mean, all I suggest is that you can go, and I know that hardwood floors and more, and I'm not advertising them, but they have books that you can go to and look through in the 1800s or the 1900s or 1700s, what the patterns looked like at that time, and make a selection and order it. But you need to go to a wallpaper company that have books that will give you samples of wallpaper of the centuries, whatever you want, the 18 or 1900 series.
But whatever we choose now, it's going to be what we see now. We won't know what was actually in here outside of those scraps over there on that wall.
That's correct.
Whatever we choose now, it's going to be
You're
what we're
gonna
choosing
change-
now.
You're going to change the whole look. You're going to change the face look it completely. But that doesn't mean that you can't take that sheetrock down in the future and come back with that, because you're not destroying the finish, the wall itself. But what you're creating another, as I say, another design, but you're not changing the walls. Okay, so if you want to remove that sheetrock like we did in the past, then you can go back to the wood, because it's not going to go anywhere. The sheetrock is not going to damage the wood other than where you put the screws or attach it to the wall.
Right.
So you can remove that sheetrock in the future and you're right back to the finish that you are now.
Why would we do that?
Well, that's by choice. You know, if a person wants to go back with the natural wood, then he can scrap and take that. That's one way that you can come back to the natural foundation that you have there. If you didn't want that paneling, not the paneling, but the sheetrock and the wallpaper design.
Okay. All right. Any other thoughts on this?
No.
What do you think about the room as it is now?
The room, well, the room is excellent. And I look at it that I think that back in the years, I said the 1800s or 1700s, we used a varnish for the furniture. And this wall, as far as I'm concerned, could be created. That's what they use for furniture. So there was times they have used that on the walls. So this is still a good sample of what was done maybe in the 1900s, because of the stain and the furniture they did with furniture. Sometimes we do the walls. So this is not out of character, as far as I'm concerned, of the year time. You know, it's about choices, really, for as I'm concerned. It's about what you want. But if you go back to natural wood, they preserve that by putting a stain or like they did for furniture on the walls.
Okay.
So this is not out of step, for as I'm concerned. As for the year, it's about choices of what you want. That's the way I look at it. But on this wall, I'm really impressed with the finishing and the results of this, because it shows the natural character of the wood and the years that it preserved over the years. So I think it's a real good, that's my opinion, but everybody has one.
Thank you, Mr. Parris.
Okay.